I want to share with you the flip side to my sprinter slash cargo van transport business operation in this segment of the Gig Geezer. If this is your first time checking out the Gig Geezer, if you're a returning visitor of the Gig Geezer, thanks for coming by. And if you would not mind, hit that subscribe button, give my content a thumbs up, share my content among others, and I definitely welcome your comments in the section below. Today is Sunday morning, December 3rd, 2023. And we are at the end of yet another work week. And what I wanted to do was spend a few minutes talking about the flip side of things. And what I mean by that is I think a lot of us as content creators, we want to draw people into our content by showing the victories, if you will. And yes, there are many of us who also show the defeats. And that's how you keep it real. I get that. That's how you keep things transparent. That's how you show that you are really your true intent of the content that you create, you produce, and upload on your channel. And I'd like to think that I've done that. In fact, I know I have. And this segment of the Gig Geezer is going to be no different. Now, I'm going to explain this. In recent segments, what I've tried to do is really also provide some content that's that really can help you stay in business. In fact, it was the title to this particular segment of the Gig Geezer: How to Stay in the Cargo Van Business. And then in this segment of the Gig Geezer, I posed a question. Again, I'm mentioning it about how I posed the question to myself and maybe to you. Am I guilty? Am I part of the problem? Or am I part of the solution? And I believe that the way that you be a part of the solution is that you provide content that really causes people to think about what they're getting into or what they're already in, and how that they can improve upon what they're doing. So that said, last week, November 25th, 2023, which is last week Saturday, I got on the one. What I mean by getting on the one, it was a day in which I earned over $1,000. And the exact number was $1,010.21. And I'll share the breakdown of that. But yesterday, Saturday, December 2nd, 2023, I earned all of, and this is pending tips and all, because there's some tips that have yet to be resolved. But based unofficially, I earned $263.21. And I was out there a lot longer than I was yesterday. I was out there yesterday a lot longer than I was last week Saturday. And also, I drove almost as many miles as I did last week Saturday and made basically a quarter of what I earned last week. That's the other side of things. Now, why didn't I talk about earning $1,000 last week? Because I didn't want to. I just felt that I would be hyping something, and I've said this before. I feel that based on what I have done with in terms of my sprinter slash cargo van ownership and operation experience, I feel that I may incite some people to jealousy based on what I've done. And while I'm not really I really don't give a fuck about what some people think of me, I have made a conscious effort at being responsible with the content that I have created and what I have uploaded. Again, what I want to do ultimately is help folk to stay in business if they get into it, or if you're in it, try to improve upon what you're doing. Difference, $747. That's a big fucking difference when you go from one week to the other. what I also didn't mention about last week, that $1,000, it was definitely welcomed. I got to admit, it was more than welcome, because when I left the Geezer compound last week Saturday, I was really concerned about how was I going to address things. I've shared many times that I've had sleepless nights and I've had my moments of concern. I mean, I guess if I wasn't concerned about how things are going, then I would be delusional. But I was really concerned last week, and when things when things materialized as they did, it was a big sigh of relief, and it's like my brain could decompress for a moment. I mean, I could have that moment to excel, and that's exactly what had happened. But I wasn't gonna hype up about the $1,000. And let's be real. We grown folk about this. If I make reference to you, if I infer to you, I don't apologize. But I'm gonna say this based on some content creators' history, their body of work. If there were most content creators, if they made $1,000 in a day, regardless what day of the week, in my case, it happened to be on a Saturday, which is an accomplishment in itself, that would be their lead piece. Biggest fucking day, $1,000. They got on the one. And by the way, I've talked about 5 or 6 minutes or so into this segment of the Geezer. If you like the content that's been provided in this one and any other, hit that subscribe button, give my content a thumbs up, share my content among others, and I definitely welcome your comments in the section below. I'm going to give you a breakdown of the two in category how the money was earned. On November 25th, $700 was earned by a brokered opportunity. Brokered opportunity in which I drove at the most 125 miles. I made 7 bills on that one. Then, upon driving back towards Columbia, I happened to catch a last mile opportunity that ultimately earned me $287.62. In fact, here's a screenshot. Here's the actual photo of the items that were delivered. And then I earned $22.59 on Gig Food Delivery app. Now that's my 3 main categories. The only thing's missing on this is cash gain. So, and as I've shared oftentimes, the priority of how things are for me right now, number one, my first option, my first priority, or the first thing that I'm looking for are brokered opportunities. The next thing that I'm looking for are last mile opportunities. And then the last thing that I'm looking for, the third thing I'm looking for, are gig food opportunities. And I hit all 3 last week. Yesterday, $0 brokered opportunity. $43.12 last mile. So that meant the remaining $220.09 was on gig food delivery apps. Now, I've described when you work gig food delivery apps, it's like 3 yards in a cloud of dust, because things go at a much slower pace. And at least for me, as how this business has evolved, as my personal enterprise has evolved, that money earned, the volume of that money earned is not at the same volume of many last mile opportunities, or for that matter, brokered opportunities. In fact, as I've gotten to a point, I would prefer to earn last mile and brokered opportunity money far more than I would gig food money. But I'm also going to say this. I've often said too that what I've tried to do is become less reliant on gig food delivery money. I have never said that I'm going to ditch the apps. All I've said, I wanted to become less reliant, and I'll share I'll share why in a few moments. What happened yesterday has been characteristic of basically this entire week. And while I have topped $2,000 or more earned this week, in fact, at $2,005 and change, this week has been yesterday really has been what most of this week has been, where I've had to go to the ground game, the 3 yards in a cloud of dust with the gig food delivery apps to try to bring in money for the business this week. Wednesday, day that pissed me off to the highest of festivity, $161 earned. Friday, upon realizing that not much is happening, I had to go back to the ground game, the gig food delivery apps, to reach $208 earned on Friday. So this is the flip side of things, at least for the gig geezer. I'll also say this too. If someone asks me how I feel about that, well, I've already shared that, it's like the ground game, 3 yards in a cloud of dust. You handed the ball off to the fullback or to the running back, and your line isn't creating holes in space for you to run. But I also will say this, at least from a dollar standpoint, if I'm earning a couple $100 in a day, and I'm out there as I was yesterday and on Friday, to me that's F-150 money. And earlier this year, I had a lot of rocks and arrows and spears and boulders and chains hurled at me based on that premise, where folk telling me, I could do that in my Nissan Altima. I could do that in my Honda Civic. I could do that in my Kia Soul. And I'm not going to go any further about that because, folk had their reason to say that, but they failed to realize, at least at that time, as I mentioned, I was making a transition from doing primarily gig food delivery work, working out of my F-150 into a Sprinter/cargo van, and there were other revenue streams that I was trying to get on board with through the gig apps, and even for that matter, waiting for my authority to be active long enough so that I could try to get on with some brokers. I would explain that, but folk didn't see that. All they saw was, you're making a couple $100 a day. You got a fucking van. You should be making more. Okay. Another reason why I said that I wanted to become less reliant on gig food delivery work is because when you're out there doing gig food work, you're subject to a lot of fucking customer abuse. And what I mean by customer abuse, I've always said that you're one delivery away from being deactivated. All it takes is the wrong fucking customer to allege something of you, and these gig apps invariably will take what they say is gospel, and then you're presumed guilty, and with little to no chance of being reinstated. Other ways of what I call customer abuse on certain apps, these customers are empowered to where they can take back all or part of the tip, and they can give you a fucked up rating for no justifiable reason. And this is what I've experienced in recent weeks on these gig food delivery apps. Well, before somebody say what I think they're going to say, on the DoorDash app, for example, according to the DoorDash app, I have completed more than 5,700 orders since 2019. On the UberEats app, I've completed altogether since 2017 over 4,000 orders according to the app. On Grubhub, it's about the same number, about over 4,000 completed orders since 2020. And on Instacart, I'm closing in on, since March 2020, according to the app, about 2,000 completed orders. So I've got a history with these apps, and you've got to remember, I started out this channel doing gig food delivery work. But that said, yesterday I had a customer to take back the entire tip, $8.58, alleging that I tampered with the fucking food. At least according to the description of why I got a thumbs down. On Instacart recently, I've had a spate of customers who have trashed me in ratings, a 1-star and 2 3-star ratings, for no apparent reason. There is nothing on the app. Usually in the past with Instacart, customers will leave reasons why they will leave reasons or complaints or whatever it is, that they felt that how you fucked up on their order, be it damaged items, wrong item, they didn't get their order, shit like that. Okay. But there's nothing. But yet these fuckers have either trashed me in rating, or in one case on November 18, in fact, it was a order in which there was 4 fucking items. I handed him the order because he came out to my van and I handed him the order. He took back $7 of an $8 tip and gave me a 3-star. That's customer abuse. I went to Instacart about it. It used to be that Instacart, a couple years ago, Instacart said that they would reimburse drivers up to $10 if they found that, if they agreed that a customer had tip baited you. Well, I found out Instacart don't do that anymore. So basically, customers have been empowered to do what they've always done, that they can fuck you over with a poor rating and take back all or part of your tip. I've talked about this one before, and it may have sounded as if it's a rant, but what I'm about to share is case in proof why I have said what I've said in the past. What I've said in the past is that I have loathed to share content about expenses, because I believe that when people bring up the topic of expenses, well, what about your expenses? What about dollars per mile? What about earnings before income tax, depreciation, and amortization? Well, why don't you talk about this? Why don't you bring up that? Well, the reason why I have loathed to do it, because I was quick to learn, I was quick to realize that some people like to diminish what you've earned. They want to, so that's why one of the things I've tried to do in being responsible is to say revenue earned. I haven't said gross revenue, although I could do that, but businesses do talk about revenue generated, revenue earned, okay? The only time businesses really talk about, this is just from my experience, the only time businesses really talk about their net earnings and their net earnings and their expenses is when they're in fucking financial trouble, or they're trying to, they're making their quarterly statements for their investors. And I'll say more about that. But in a recent segment of the Gig Geezer, someone who has also sent me personal email in the past, this particular person commented on this segment of the Gig Geezer, but then he posed this to me. I would like to challenge you. You speak on the hype side of business gross, in parentheses, gross income. Would you be willing to add the expense side of the balance sheet? In business, every business has both sides. I'm going to go further into what he says. That's a good place to start. Well, he spoke about the IRS accepts 57 cents per mile as operating a freight. I think what he wanted to say is that you can claim when operating a commercial vehicle 57 cents a mile. That's a good place to start when measuring your/my business. In 2023, my cost per mile is 18 cents, and I'm at 43,984 miles, so far beating the IRS big time. That's buying a cargo van, a 2020 ProMaster City. That is a Dodge van. It is the small Sprinter. It is the small cargo van. It's the mini cargo van. No commercial insurance, just full coverage with a $2,000 down payment. How capable someone is with managing costs is just as important as obtaining gross income. Saving a penny a mile is just as important as making a penny a mile. Well, that's not the first time he's posed something like that to me. In another segment of the Gig Geezer, in fact, this is the thumbnail, he says, maybe just that everybody else is talking about the topic. Everybody else is talking about the topic. He comes out with this, maybe just add net profit. Real net profit. 99,000 gross and 72,000 net? That's a high bar, or maybe in your world, $60,000 net. Now, why the fuck did he bring that shit up in the first place? Now, I have come to realize after reading his stuff a couple of times, this is my response to his first comment. Apparently, you've not seen past segments, as many as perhaps a dozen, all in 2003, in which I've divulged all of what you've asked. My question to you is, what good does my divulging my expenses do for you? And I'm going to go as far as to say, does my divulging my expenses help you have a larger fucking Johnson, a larger and thicker Johnson? Does it help you gain more stamina? Or does it delay your ejaculation? What the fuck does it do for you? Your expenses and net revenue do nothing for me. The only reason my expenses and net income should matter to you is if you're interested in investing into my business. And that's a fact. Otherwise, your obsession about my expenses and net revenue is merely pocket watching. I'll even share this. I'm sure what I paid to the IRS in 2022 is less than what you paid. And guess what? Is that any business of yours? Now, I'm not apologizing for what I said thus far to him, and I'm not apologizing for what I've said thus far about does it make his Johnson larger and thicker? Because really and truly, if we share our expenses, and I see why CJ said this. I see why CJ said this, why he's not going to be sharing a lot of this stuff. I share it in the interest of, I have shared it in the interest of transparency, but really and truly, it doesn't mean fucking thing, because your expenses are different than my expenses. And the reason why your expenses are different than my expenses is because it all also depends on what you're claiming as your expenses. I have in these videos in which I have shared expenses, I have shared a lot of shit, man. I've shared based on items, the actual items that I have claimed I've shared as expenses, actual categories of expenses. I've shared dollar per mile. I've shared return on investment. But then again, I've even gone as far as with the actual expenses. I've gone further than what most people do. What I've shared in terms of what my expenses are things that I will claim on taxes. And these are all legitimate fucking taxes. These are all legitimate expenses that I can claim and will claim. For example, office rent, interest paid on vehicles, subscriptions, various subscriptions, be it for load boards or for software, you name it, marketing, actual repairs or actual maintenance. And those are just a few of them. All of these are items that I can claim on my taxes. But most people, when they share what their expenses are, usually they're going to talk about their insurance, their van payment, and maybe gas. Again, your expenses are different than mine. You've got a fucking ProMaster. I'm just using your fucking ProMaster as an example. Your ProMaster is not a 250 Transit. You opted to go with commercial insurance because you're probably doing gig apps, and you're probably doing you may not doing the work that requires you to have commercial insurance. I'm not mad at you, man. But again, what you're doing is different from me. And so you asking me about my fucking expenses and wanting to know what my numbers are don't mean shit. One other thing while I'm at this. I think I've shown where I have had a willingness to answer questions for people. And but there are some questions that people ask that kind of I just kind of shake my head. One of the common questions is asked, how do you start this? How do you get into the I've actually shown in this particular segment of the Gig Geezer and in this particular segment of the Gig Geezer, how do you start getting into cargo van business? If you want to call it that. In fact, now that I'm in the month of December and I have basically been a year into this, I don't know if you really just get into a cargo van business. I believe that what you're doing is that you're looking to make a purchase of a Sprinter/cargo van. And what you're doing is you're using this vehicle, like mine, as your means by which you earn revenue. One of the earliest things that I said about my getting a Sprinter cargo van was that it will give me a greater earnings capacity. And I believe that's probably the best answer that can be given after a year now. So when people talk about getting into a business and all that, and you gotta get all these paperwork and all this, it is true that yes, if you want to form a business, a true business entity, there are administrative things that you have to do. But from a practical standpoint, all you're doing is you're looking into the cost of a vehicle that may give you a different earnings capacity. And that's it. And for me, it was the right move. I've seen people now talk about, well, for me, it was the right move. I've shared in past segments, but I'm going to share in this segment. The difference for me is at least 25% more revenue based on all the things that I've done, based on all the business decisions that I've made as a result of me having this Spinner cargo van. The difference in income as of today, December 2nd, 2023, versus all of last year is already 25%. So that was a good decision. The other thing is that along the lines of expenses, personally, I never went on people's channels and asking them all the questions that I've seen asked. And I believe, and I'm going to refer back to CJ. I believe CJ has offered the best answer to this. You got to do your own homework, as I would say. Most people say do your own research. You got to do your own fucking homework. Here's the thing. You got to do your own fucking homework. Because ultimately, you're the one that's looking to do this if you're really serious about it. If you're not serious about it, you can ask all the fucking questions you want and all, and you can try to get as many answers as you can off of other people. But again, it goes back to the expenses thing. Ultimately, what the cost for you to operate your business is going to be much different from mine. The guy that says he's operating at 18 cents a mile, I don't know what he's basing it on, but if it's 18 cents a mile, good for you, man. Like I said, there's a lot more factors into my numbers. There's a lot more items. There's a lot more variables into my number. That is the reason why it's going to be more. Is what it is. But I never scoured people's channels asking them a bunch of questions, sending them emails, asking them certain questions. I looked into it myself. And then here's the other thing. When it came to trying to find out about expenses, I will say this much. What I did was I already knew what my expenses were prior to this transaction. And as I shared, and I always go back to this segment, what is your break point? Then I started adding other stuff like the van and the commercial insurance. So at a minimum, I knew what my overall expenses were. Okay. And from there, I set that as my target. That being my target, to where hopefully my revenues will intersect with my expenses and surpass expenses. But that intersection is my break point. Was my break point. Now these are things that I did on my own, man. I didn't go around asking a bunch of other folk. I didn't pay anybody. And I believe that, if you have to pay somebody, do what you have to do. But there's nothing replaces your own experience. Nothing replaces that. Nothing. Now, I've talked enough on this particular segment of the Gig Geezer. I know that it seems like I've gone on a diatribe, but it's not. I'm just sharing the flip side of things on this segment. And if you like the content that's been provided in this segment or in any other segment, hit that subscribe button, give my content a thumbs up, share my content among others, and I definitely welcome your comments in the section below. I'm Inwood Lane, and as always, may your grind and may your hustle continue.